Well, hello everyone. We're back with the 2023 Hack Summit. We're joined here by Fernando Martinelli, who's the co-founder of Balancer, and interviewing him will be Roshan Patel, who's a partner at Hack VC. It's going to be a great talk, and I think we'll all learn a lot. So Roshan and Fernando, feel free to take it away.
Thanks, Ed. Fernando, absolute pleasure to have you here at the summit. I think we'd start with kind of everyone knows you as the co-founder of Balancer, but of course you've been in the crypto space for a while. Maybe you can get into kind of how you first entered the space, what got you into crypto.
Sure. Yeah. Like many, I've been introduced to Bitcoin by a friend and initially thought it was a scam and it's just something you want to buy and then later sell for more than you bought it. And he insisted like, oh, take a look at like all the cool stuff. Like it's, avoids double spend and no one can take it away from you. All the amazing things that we love Bitcoin for. Then I fell down the rabbit hole. That was before Ethereum existed. And I was really into like, I expected that crypto would only be, would get mass adoption once the stable coin or the stable problem was solved, like a way to keep values stable because people are just scared of losing 10%, 15% every day or increasing by 20%. So volatility was a problem. And when Ethereum came out, I thought to myself, well, smart contracts is what will allow stablecoins to exist. And back then there were like BitShares and some experiments, and Rune was already kind of doing things in the stablecoin space. And that's kind of how I also got in love with Ethereum. Got involved really early on with the MakerDAO team. And that's where I got to know Nikolai and Brune and all the amazing guys at the early days, in the early days of MakerDAO. And everything led to Balancer eventually.
That's an amazing story. So speaking of Balancer, for the audience here that may not be too familiar, maybe you can give a brief overview of what the protocol does and kind of what problem the protocol is trying to solve.
Yeah, so Balancer and kind of a little bit of my motivation to create it. I had some MKR or in the early days, had some DAI, had some ETH, and I was wondering, and that was like when people were talking about automated market makers. Vitalik like put out the idea of X times Y equals K, and Alan Liu, the OGs of AMMs, and I thought to myself, maybe there's a way to create a pool of assets where you have allocations that are kept stable in a way, like rebalanced. I don't want to be selling an asset that goes up and rebuying once it goes down. Like I want to make this automatic. And that was the inspiration for Balancer. I kind of created this idea of a pool with up to 8 assets and customized or customizable weights. So you could have like whatever combination of weights. And it has very interesting properties. You can do pools that are very still popular today, 80-20 pools, where you're mostly long one of the tokens, but you still have exposure to the other one, 20%. And you generate volume, not as much as a 50-50 like Uniswap, but you have those properties that are good for the LPs. So yeah, Balancer V1 was pretty much that, like this idea that you can create a pool of up to 8 tokens, also swap fees that are configurable. And then Balancer V2 is really an evolution of Balancer. When we realized that some people were forking Balancer to create some interesting stuff, like changing the invariant, or to be able to use the underlying tokens in a pool to vote. So we created this new idea of Balancer V2, which is a vault that allows pools to have their own specific logic, while all the tokens and all the accounting, all the low-level stuff is done in a central vault that makes it very cheap, gas-wise, very secure, and allows for future-proofness. Like it's nice because now we have stable swap pools using maths from Curve. We have very interesting concentrated liquidity pools from Gyroscope Finance. Yeah, they're just launching very soon. We got launched their alpha and everything. We have like Cron Finance launching TWAMs, which are time-weighted average AMMs on top of Balance. So you can have all those different types of pools, all those different innovation iterations of AMMs that are built on the same vault and with the same interface to aggregators. So we allow people to innovate much faster by using our vault, our existing vault, because aggregators will see their liquidity as soon as they create their pools. And there's like examples of other people who did that, as opposed to someone wanting to create an AMM, like going from scratch and creating the whole thing. So that's the idea of Balancer V2. It's really to enable faster iteration and innovation of new AMM types. We believe there is still a lot of cool stuff to be done on the AMM space or in the AMM space. So Balancer's idea is really to enable that, to foster that.
Great. No, that's great. And yeah, you actually touched on a question I would have followed up on, which is like some of the differences between the AMM models that are out there. And I think you touched on them pretty well. So maybe we think a little bit more about, what do you think about AMMs versus order books, particularly in the context of DeFi and on-chain transactions, and maybe can they work together? Are they completely different? And potentially how, Balancer fits into that thought.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think order books or order book style AMMs or protocols like 1inch and PairSwap, they have their place. I think it's definitely a great tool for us to have. I use those protocols. I think it's good to kind of not have to worry about price impact, because if you want to use an AMM and there's not a lot of liquidity, you're going to have price impact depending on the size of your order. And you can also say, like, I'm only comfortable selling this when it reaches that price point, and you just set it and forget the order, which is something we used to on CEXs, centralized exchanges, but we've seen over and over again those exchanges being hacked and kind of collapsing, like you name it, Bitfinex, yeah, lots of them now, recently FTX. So it's of course, there's on the other side, the flip side, 1inch protocol might be hacked, or there might be a bug where they can just steal your funds. But as everything in DeFi, you have to wait for things to have some Lindy. And I think that's some of the great thing. One of the great things of Balancer is that it's been around for a long time, and I think there's obviously things that can be found, but I think like major bugs where like your entire assets are at risk, I don't fear for my funds, my tokens on protocols like 1inch order book exchange or protocol. So yeah, to summarize, I think you can mash up those two. And a great experiment is Cron Finance's TWAM. They're creating this idea of like, I want to sell a lot of ETH for USDC, and someone wants to buy a lot of ETH for USDC, and they put together like those average time-weighted average AMMs where they buy a little bit every day, and the other one kind of sells. So there's kind of a match, a little bit like cow swap, a coincidence of once. So those two orders get kind of matched up together in a way. It's kind of order books, and that is done with a very in a very smart way, very gas efficient. So to summarize, I think order books are great. Concentrated liquidity UniV3 uses a little bit of this concept of order book with the conventional X times Y equals A. I think there's still a lot of innovation to come in the AMM space, especially executing orders, execution, MEV, and even in the shape of invariants and using NFTs. There's a lot to be created still. And Balance is really that, like a infrastructure, a piece of infrastructure where smart guys who are coming to DeFi right now have new ideas. They can build faster and iterate faster.
Got it. No, that's great. And then to dig a little bit more into the kind of going off that thought, and you touched on a couple of the potential innovations in AMMs you see, but to get a little more granular, maybe of the things you mentioned or something that you didn't mention, what do you see as like a feature that is not a staple today or not widely used or maybe at all, but in the future you see as being a really core staple of AMMs and on-chain trading? If there's not one, you can do a couple, whatever, but maybe your favorite ones.
Yeah, sure. That's also a great question. I think it's getting clearer and clearer that the future is multi-chain and roll-up centric. I'm a big fan of Ethereum. I've always believed in the flippening, that Ethereum will get more relevant than Bitcoin at some point. That's inevitable to me. And I do think there's going to be lots of roll-ups with different kind of sweet spots and pros and cons and whatnot. So I think that AMMs living in this multi-chain, multi-L2 space in a smooth way is something that is interesting. So imagine like having different vaults of Balancer across chains, and those vaults kind of have a way to communicate. And that's a very challenging problem, bridging, and we know like bridges can go bad real quick. But there's very bright teams working on this cross-chain messaging and bridging. So this is something I'm excited about, and app chains as well, like the idea of having applications on their own chains or roll-ups. I do think that this is a ways off still. Like I think composability is a very important core feature of Ethereum. So I do think there's going to be winning L2s like roll-up chains like Optimism and ZK Sync and Arbitrum. What else? I think there is a lot to solve in the space of MEV. So the idea of giving back to users that kind of created an MEV opportunity for bots or for specialized actors in the space to get some value out of it, giving back to users. And I think CalSwap is doing something very interesting there, and I'm excited. They have some new stuff coming out soon. So I think this idea of positive MEV and kind of giving back on MEV for AMMs, because you always have price impact. You move the price when you buy or sell something. So this is something I'm excited about too.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like there's a lot to look forward to. One of the cool things about DeFi is sort of the modular stack where, you can build something like Balancer and people can build some more things on top of it. And you touched on Gyroscope earlier and Aura, these sort of platforms that probably, couldn't exist without Balancer, that are kind of built on top of them or built on top of Balancer. How do you see them playing a role in Balancer's future and directing liquidity or any other sorts of ways you see these platforms that are on top?
Absolutely. I think that this is like the core tenet of Balancer V2. It's really to be infrastructure, and I've been saying that for a long time. Balancer's success is the success of those building on top of Balancer. So I do think that out of the many interesting projects that are building cool stuff on top of Balancer, and that includes Gyroscope, Cron, and many others, like Aura Finance that's building on top of the VBAL, our tokenomics. I think like if just a few of those are very successful, then Balancer will be successful, because there's going to be a lot of network effects, and there's going to be a lot of funds in the vault, and people will trust the protocol, and they will see that they can build faster like those successful protocols and by using Balancer. So I do think that it's crucial, and it's central to Balancer Labs, the company I work for. It's really to put other teams on the spotlight and the focus and center of our focus, to really make sure we have good dev UX, that we have good documentation. So yeah, I think by allowing protocols to have their own use cases, their own cool stuff, their own users, their own communities, we can be a lot more successful than trying to solve a problem ourselves. So that's the idea of Balancer scaling as infrastructure.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then, maybe to step back a little bit at a higher level, kind of the future of the exchange space between both decentralized and centralized exchanges. How do you see that looking in 5-10 years? Are there centralized exchanges at all? Do they work together in some way? Are they completely distinct? Yeah, curious your thoughts on just the high level overview of just generally decentralized versus centralized.
Yeah, that's it's also a great question. I do believe that in the future, like longer term time frame, 5 to 10 years, if we solve the problem of scalability, which I think we will, maybe CEXs will just disappear. Centralized exchanges will just disappear because they are inferior, right? They have like the intrinsic problem of like you not holding your keys, you're not holding your crypto. So and we've seen time and time again that people lose money there. And so I do think that if you get to a UX, to a transaction throughput, to and kind of marry that with the safety, security of you having your keys, having your money, and I think rollups can be that solution. And there might be in the future like layer 3s and layer 4s. I don't know. There can be like lots of different ways this can scale. I can see a future where like these centralized exchanges don't exist anymore. Like you never give up custody of your assets because you don't need to get better UX or to get features that now you can only do on centralized exchanges. I think there's lots of protocols working on challenging problems like derivatives and leverage trading, like all sorts of like futures. There's a lot of interesting things that are complex that CEXs are intrinsically better at, but I think those problems can all be solved. So I hope that we'll be in a future where you never give up custody of your assets.
Yeah, that actually leads me to a follow-up question, which is a lot of the AMMs, the focus right now, and naturally so, is on spot trading. You get one asset in, one asset out, it kind of instantly settles. Do you think AMMs have a place in, or even generally like just decentralized exchanges, a place in derivatives on chain and leverage, or linear, convex, like options?
Yeah, I do. As I said, I think it's the early days. We started like with AMMs tackling spot markets, and while we see like looking at Uniswap and the volume it makes every day, and all the other like Balancer curve, we see that it is like something that people want to do, and there's like room for that. And it's really a matter of technology scaling, UX improving for all those like more complex types of trades and kind of operations to happen, like derivatives and futures. So yeah, I think as someone commented, CEX are not going anywhere. Too much money to be made for VCs. That's a good point, but I do think that things can radically change if you give them enough time. So 5 to 10 years, I think it's long enough for this industry to be at a stage where you don't need to give up custody. Of course, there's lots of regulatory and kind of more complex challenges that are not only related to technology, but I'm an optimist. I think that can be done.
Got it. No, that makes sense. Yeah, there's some questions and the chat's going off a little bit. I don't want to seem like I'm completely ignoring the chat, but I think one thing here is good for you to clarify. Someone asked how do you, they asked Fernando particularly, not even Balancer, handle counterparty risk? As far as I understand, the Balancer protocol doesn't necessarily really have counterparty risk, but maybe you could touch into like how counterparty risk on chain in an AMM type protocol differs from counterparty risk in an exchange, and how the settlement works, and really who is the counterparty if there is one.
Yeah, that's a cool thing. If I understand it correctly, what Andrew means by counterparty risk, there is no risk, right? You settle. That's the beauty of blockchain. Like you have other protocols like AirSwap and Matcha. Like you have ways to settle 0x. You have ways to settle like exchanges where no one has any risk. Of course, there's always protocol risk and smart contract risk, but it's really like something that you don't need to worry about. And there are other risks, like if you LP, you have to think of impermanent loss, buying something that keeps going down and down, and then you end up worse off than you were or you would have been if you just held your tokens. So there are different types of risks. As things get complex, there are more risks because things are just like building on top of each other. So there's a lot of composability. So you need to understand like all the different ramifications of what you're using, like what depends on what. For example, DAI lost its bag because USDC lost its bag. So, I thought DAI was completely censorship resistant and kind of non-custodial. And well, it has a lot of USDC backing it, so it suffered with that. So there's lots of risks in terms of things being connected, and that's, I think, the big problem that you see for DeFi and anything on chain.
Got it. No, that makes sense. There's a question here about order books being susceptible to front runner attacks. And I guess, AMMs, of course, are susceptible to MEV front running sandwiches. So I guess maybe you could touch on kind of where these mechanisms or these systems are susceptible to risks and like potentially maybe even some solutions to mitigate them. I'm sure people in here have fat fingered some slippage here and there. Yeah.
That's a long known problem that you can just look at the mempool and front run trades. There are ways around that, and it's not a simple kind of topic, but you can see things like cow swap, which I'm a big fan of, and actually Balancer's UI has that like uses cow swap under the hood. So they have batches of transactions, and then they try to first make a coincidence of once, and then they execute all those orders at the same time with protection against front runners. So if someone front runs them, they just like the transaction just reverts because they are or if someone front run them, they won't use they won't do the trade. So actually the front runner lost money trying to sandwich attack, because you actually can set up how much you want to get back from a trade. So and that's also a very big problem if you don't set correctly your slippage. So I want to get at least 0.1% close to that value that you're promising me. If you don't set that correctly, and I've seen that happening over and over again, like people just forgot and set 20% slippage tolerance, and then they just like got ripped. So yeah, I think it's a problem that can be solved, but it's definitely a problem that hasn't yet been fully solved.
Got it. That makes sense. And there's a question here about Cosmos, but I guess the broader question really would be, Balancer has kind of been Ethereum L1, EVM focused, and you were discussing some of these, cross-chain potential launches. Like, how do you think about, L2s versus Cosmos IBC and other opportunities where Balancer could be applied?
Yeah, so Cosmos is really interesting. I'm also a big fan. Haven't been very active in the community, unfortunately, because there's so much to do already. But I do think that having having Cosmos and IBC, I think is a great way to have shared security, which Cosmos is big in, and intercommunication of the different I forget what it's called. Parachain is Polkadot, and whatever name of the different chains within Cosmos. Yeah, so I think there are people building on building something similar to Balancer or forking us there, but it's something that we might, as a DAO, kind of decide to do. Of course, it has to be VM compatible. We don't want to be creating code, so I think there's moving that's EVM compatible. So app chains, yeah. Thanks, Claudio.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so we only have a couple minutes left here, so I wanted to shift gears a little bit because, you know, we're a developer focused summit after all. So do you have any advice for maybe like young developers looking to contribute to the future of DeFi or finance? Should they join a DAO? Like any entry points you can recommend for people that want to get involved in this?
Absolutely. We need more young, talented developers and entrepreneurs. So yeah, joining a DAO is a great way to learn from people who have been around for some time and have made a lot of mistakes, like I did, like many of us did. So learning from others is a great start. I think there's lots of DAOs there that desperately need more people like active, and if you want really to make a difference and you get to understand deeply what that protocol or that DAO is all about, you can very fast like make an impact and start being a central like player in that space. And then like if let's say you want to build an AMM, it's great for you to kind of join Balancer and maybe other AMMs. If you want to build derivatives platform, like go see what's around in DYDX and others. So yeah, I think joining DAOs and being around in Discord is where everything happens, and you can make a difference by answering questions, even if you're not paid for that. And at some point, people realize that you're adding value, and that's been the case with a lot of people with us at Balancer, at the community, who kind of ended up becoming paid members of the DAO. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, Ed.
Hey, thank you for the great talk today. Roshan and Fernando, you guys did a great job, and we all learned a lot. Thank you for being with us and teaching us about Balancer today and talking about all the very interesting DeFi issues related to it. Coming up, we have an uncollateralized lending panel with TrueFi, Maple, and Alloy X. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you enjoyed learning today from Balancer, please consider donating to one of our charities at hacksummit.org. And we will see you in just a minute. Thanks again, Roshan, and for Fernando for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.